Morning, everybody. Or is it afternoon? Waiting for a few people to pop on here as we get started. So how is everybody doing right now? And I know I've seen an influx while we're waiting for people to hop on here. Today I decided to do a live feed and talk about basically what are you feeling and what you're experiencing lately. I've seen a lot of people post about their increase in stress and how overwhelmed they are or feeling a little off, maybe a little funky. For those who are on, there are a couple polls that you should be able to see. Feel free to add in there and take the polls. That would really help us. So some of you have been experiencing heightened anxieties or heart flutters, cardiac stuff, triggers, maybe bouts of anger, all these different things, or maybe just not feeling yourself. So I wanted to kind of talk about this because for me, it's easier to talk about it than it is to, write about it. So figure here I am. I'm here to answer your questions. So as we're waiting for people, and if you have questions in the meantime, even while I'm talking, as I am seeing, I will answer the questions the best I can. So I want to just say a lot of times what we're experiencing is not in your head. A lot of these symptoms, what I find is that people go, either their medical treatment all of a sudden stopped working, or whatever they're doing isn't working altogether. I just want to say, no, you're not crazy, and no, you're not alone. Just in the past 24 hours, I've had 2 emergencies come in, and one was a cardiac issue with heart flutters, and another one was an extreme panic attack that came in. And then when I was done after meditation, we did meditation last night, and I heard very similar symptoms. And all right around like in cycles, right? We've got cycles. So I'm all about patterns and cycles. So one of the things that I have found when you can't explain things medically or physically, we've done all this work, the one thing I've learned over the past couple of years is the impact of space weather. How many of you know what space weather is? So space weather is something we're going to talk about right now. And there's been a lot of fluctuations. And one of the things that I have been experiencing, it's something that I've been paying attention to probably the last 3 or 4 years. Actually, take that back, more like 5 or 6 years. And I'm very sensitive, by the way, to things like solar flares and certain other space weather. So certain types would make me either I couldn't sleep, depending on the type of space weather. Other times it felt like somebody just hit me over the head and I just can't move. I can't get up. It's like I'm stuck. And so different ions, different space weather affects me differently. So I've been kind of studying this and seeing how it affects our health. So I want to talk about how that's happening, and mostly things like cosmic rays, geomagnetic storms, solar wind, and solar minimum. Okay, so if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to add in there. Again, just as a reminder, there are a couple polls. Want to make sure you can hear me okay as well. So if you can't hear me, please let me know, because I don't know unless you say something. So space weather. So we know what weather is, right? We got rain, wind, storms. We have these every day that happen on the planet, right? We also have what's called space weather. So how many of you actually heard of space weather? So space weather is a phenomena that scientists have really only been paying attention to. Well, from my perspective, I feel like they've only been paying attention to in recent years. It's very similar to what they call terrestrial weather that lies beyond the atmosphere. So space weather is a branch of, goes right into space physics and cosmology and things like that. So it has to do with the varying conditions within our solar system, both within our solar system, what happens in the sun. And so it includes like solar wind, it includes the magnetic field that's around our Earth and how various things affect the magnetic field. It includes conditions that are on the outer line of our atmosphere, such as the ionosphere, the exosphere, all these scientific terms that I'm not going to get into today. But space weather is very distinct because it ties into things that actually affect us on the planet. So something that happened a few months ago, I don't know if you remember the big blizzard out in Colorado. There was a big space weather event that happened and it happened the same time the blizzard hit Colorado. So it can take, for instance, how it affects our Earth weather. It can take like a Category 1 hurricane, and if a space weather storm is strong enough and hits our Earth and makes it through the atmosphere, it can take a Category 1 and make it a Category 4 with a snap of a finger. Okay, so that's how it affects even our weather systems, our weather patterns in our system. So, it affects not only our planet. If you notice, we went from global warming to climate change. I don't know how many of you noticed that, the whole phenomenon from global warming to climate change. There's a reason. Our sun was experiencing a high intensity amount of solar flares over recent years, and was, yes, igniting things within the planet and causing things to heat up. So in the past year or so, the sun has actually quieted down. We haven't had a really strong X flare or high level solar flare in well over a year. And there's even predictions that we might actually be entering the initial stages of a mini ice age that we haven't seen in 200 years. So we're in what's called a solar minimum. And one of the interesting things that I have been seeing is how it's been affecting our health. Okay. And the other thing I find interesting is that the science community is finally getting on board. From a lot of the research I've seen over recent months and years is actually coming out of Europe. And it's fascinating. They've been studying astronauts and how certain space weather affects people with cardiac conditions or people with anxiety, people that are empathic. So it's very important, if you ruled out everything else, like it's not a low pressure front, you didn't get triggered by somebody else, you take meds and you're stable, and all of a sudden, boom, things aren't working. So, and then you find that there's a pattern. Well, geez, we had a coronal mass ejection that hit the earth plane the same time you had a heart flutter, right? Then that could be something that's affecting you. We forget we are beings that are electrical conduction systems, right? We forget that. And I think the medical community also forgets that. So we conduct electricity. So when we have a geomagnetic storm that comes from the sun or through our solar system, and it makes it through our atmosphere, it does affect us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay. Does that make sense to you so far with everybody? Yes, no? So one of the things that happens is that we have the geomagnetic storms. It's kind of like a blanket term here, okay? They can come in from a solar flare, coronal mass ejection, they're basically high speeds streams that are caused by space weather. And it either comes near the Earth or it gets through the atmosphere. So we forget we have this magnetic field. It's like, here's Wonder Woman and I've got my barrier of protection, right? So the Earth has its own force field that protects us from a lot of the space weather. So one of the other phenomena that I've been finding out is that the Earth's magnetic field is about 30% weaker. So we're experiencing this weird phenomena, and there's a lot of conflicting research right now because they're not seeing the same patterns, with certain solar storms and things like that. And they go and they're being surprised in the space and in the science industry. So there's a lot of things shifting. So these geomagnetic storms affect us. Okay, that's also what gives us some of the aurora borealis, but it affects us. It also affects our GPS systems. It affects our computer systems, because when we have, depending on the intensity of the storms, it can wipe out temporarily satellites and power grids and things like that, which we saw last year with one of the storms that wiped out some of the power grids. So for those of you who want to learn more, by the way, I did write a blog on my website talking about the solar minimum and how it affects climate change and how it affects our health. You can log on there to get a lot of these details that I'm talking about, if that's helpful for you. So I noticed in the past couple of days, just based on the emergencies that have come in my office, I've only had 3 types of emergencies in the past 14 years, and I had 2 already this week. So it's telling me, even though the science is saying the space weather isn't too bad, but I am seeing an uptick in some areas of the space weather that is in direct correlation to how it's affecting people's energy and their health. So I think the science part needs to kind of get back on board with that. I'm somebody who, those who know me, I see patterns, I see things, and I go, okay, there's got to be something bigger to this. So it'd be nice if we had more science to conclude on which elements or which things actually trigger what in the human body. Okay. We do have an element that has happened. There's 2 things that have happened in the past week with space weather that has impacted people. There's the solar wind. So that's, again, the stream that comes, and we've been seeing a lot of that coming from the coronal holes, which gives a different type of particles and energy that gets released that affects us within our atmosphere. So the solar wind can vary depending on density. There's a lot of instruments now that they have that can measure these things, the density, the wind speed, the temperature, everything. So again, it's like the right, it's the right combination with the right timing that hits the earth at the right time, right? And we happen to be in a place at the right time, and then we go kaplooey, okay? So I did have somebody that was fully stable, has a severe panic, and went boom, and it took a lot to kind of bring that down. And when we looked at the patterns and the things that were going on, we timed it definitely with some of the streams that were coming in from the space weather. The person that had some heart flutters, we tied that in. Connecting that pattern might have been triggered with some coronal hole or coronal mass ejections. So I would just suggest to you, if you're having these kinds of experiences, to make sure you see patterns. Okay, pay attention to those patterns and see. If you go onto my website, again, to that blog, I do have links that you can link to see what the space weather is for the day, if you're interested. So some of the governmental sources is NOAA, NOAA.gov, and the other one is spaceweather.com. So those are 2 trusted resources that you can find if you find that these things affect you physically. Does anybody have any questions so far? No? So here are some things to pay attention to. So if you find you are sensitive to the space weather or the things that happen with the sun or again, the space weather issues, then these are some things to pay attention to. One is to make sure you get out of your head and into that heart and gut space. Listen to that wisdom of the body and pay attention, have that relationship with the body. Listen to that wisdom as it has a wealth of knowledge, because you can, even if you have that relationship, you can just ask your body, is this me? Is this the space weather? Is it because somebody just pissed me off, And it will tell you. And it will even tell you if like you're experiencing things that need urgent medical attention, you know. So please make sure, and if you do have a cardiac issue and you do experience these things, some of the research is showing that that's affecting those people tremendously. So if you do have a cardiac issue and you are experiencing these things, it is highly crucial to make sure you stay in touch with your doctor and you get in if you need to. And if worst case scenario, you go to the emergency room if you're experiencing some cardiac events, because research is showing it can trigger some serious cardiac events if you have a history of cardiac stuff going on. So that's important. One of the other things I would suggest you do is to turn off that TV programming that creates fear, that creates agendas, and that it's not in the alignment of who we are and our very core, the very being of who we are. Be careful of that inner critic. Don't always trust that old chatter, okay? Because one of the things that we've been talking about that we see, both astrologically and all these other things are also shifting, you know. I always say it's multi-layered. It's not just one or the other. This is multi-layered. But the one thing is that we're shedding that skin. A lot of the events, the retreat I just recently did, the meditation I just did last night, and a few other events I've done privately in the past 2 weeks, the one sign that's been coming in consistently is the snake or the serpent and shedding the skin, the dragon. So this is all about getting rid of the old, shedding the skin, the old beliefs, the old patterns. So it's very important that you don't trust that inner critic there, okay? Be careful of that and don't always trust that. Trust that no matter what, I think a lot of you heard me say this, that no matter what, your soul has your back. That's really important to understand that. Also understand that your body is a sacred temple. This means refrain from putting toxins in. So if you find that you are sensitive to space weather, I've had a lot of people in the past 24 hours ask me, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? You have to practice high quality, intensive spiritual hygiene. You know, like you don't go out the door without brushing your teeth, right? You don't go out with making sure that spiritually you are protected, that you are grounded, all these things. Your body is a sacred temple. You don't abuse drugs, you reduce processed foods, you eat healthy organic foods, all these things is you just remove toxins. The more toxins you remove that you put into the temple, the easier temple can handle these waves that we get that we can't control, okay? So one of the things I would suggest, and sometimes people go, oh my gosh, grow your own food or support a local organic farmer. This is highly important. I think a lot of people going back to growing their own vegetables. It's a great season right now. And I think with the space weather, we're not going to yet, I think with what the forecasts are, it's not going to be too hot for New England, but possibly wet. So you want to make sure that you're growing foods that require a lot of water probably, because you might get a lot of that this year. You are more than the reality of what you perceive, okay? We are frequency and vibration. So how can we not be affected by space weather, right? How can we not? So work with the space weather to overcome and master that flow. Pull out that surfboard and master the flow. I would also suggest, if you're struggling, to find a competent, well-skilled healer who has done the work and has walked the walk to help you reset your nervous system, your immune system, and your endocrine system. So this isn't somebody that just talks a lot of fluff and doesn't walk. Okay, this is somebody that really knows the nitty gritty. So I'm just saying that with caution. There's a lot of people with a lot of great intention, but you know, in certain cases with some of the emergencies I had experienced in the past couple of days, there are some things that can be done even with good intention can cause harm. So it's important to find a well-skilled healer that can help you reset the nervous system, that can help you reset your immune system, that can help you reset the endocrine system. We forget doctors aren't taught to be healers anymore. They're taught pharmacology. They are taught procedures. They are taught how to use the electronic medical records and CPT codes. They are not taught to become a healer. That's a hard one. If I broke my arm, I'd see a doctor. But if we're experiencing these things and we're already butting our heads and not getting answers, then we have to look at other areas that could help us, okay? Be aware of the triggers. Your triggers are showing you something that's unresolved, that has nothing to do with the current situation. And it's about healing those cords. So be aware of the triggers that might surface. Practice daily grounding. This is highly important if what the forecast says that we're going into this grand solar minimum and you are affected with this space weather. Grounding and meditation and gratitude are going to be big tools for you. Release fear and step into your own power. This is an opportunity for us. So I want to know if anybody has any questions of maybe what are you experiencing that maybe I can help answer for you. As long as it's not too specific, because some of it I might have to actually see you to know how to answer that. But I want to give you this opportunity to please, ask a question and share what you might be experiencing and how I might be able to help answer some of those questions for you. Does anybody have any questions? So how familiar is what I'm saying to you making sense? I want to make sure that what I'm saying to you makes sense. Again, if you go onto my website, www.laurahealingwithspirit.com, I have a blog there. If you go into the blog section and you go under, it will say how solar minimum can affect our health, communications, and climate change. There's a lot of resources and some science there that might help explain more what we just discussed. But remember, when we go through things like this, some things I love about Facebook is that you can go and say, does anybody else feel this? And you're not alone. I'm letting a lot of my clients I've seen have come in an emergency in the past couple of days and just reminding them that they're not alone through this. It's a matter of how do we learn to surf and navigate these changes, okay, to step into our power and to shed the skin. So it's about empowering us, even though at the time it may feel like it's not. And space weather is no joke. So again, like if you have a cardiac issue, it's something to really pay attention to. If you have anxiety, it's something to pay attention to. If you're an empath, it's something to pay attention to. But I am here. I wanted just to bring that to light to you all. Again, make sure you take the polls to kind of help me. If there's any questions, if we've already wrapped up the taping and there are questions, please leave them in the comments. So that might help me. I'm feeling like we might need to do a series of these, over the summer or something, and to help better guide you in this area. So I hope you got what you needed today. I just wanted to shed some light because I know there's been a lot of chaos in the past for some reason with some individuals, not everybody, but some people have been significantly impacted in the past couple of days. So I wanted just to shed some light on that area. Okay, have a great day with love and light, and be gentle with yourself.